Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. So transit-oriented development has been the topic of Urban Land Institute, a recent seminar. And I reached out to Aidan Grove White. He's a vice president of land development and infrastructure at a public affairs consultancy called the Strategy Corp here in Toronto, where he works on development and transit projects across the greater Golden Horseshoe, the Greater Toronto Area, to tell us a little bit about what happened at that seminar and a little bit about transit-oriented development and if we can actually achieve some of the objectives that the provincial government has set out in its platform commitment. As you may know, the recently re-elected Progressive Conservative government has committed $61.5 billion for new transit across the Greater Golden Horseshoe. Aidan, welcome to the show. How are you?
Great, thanks. How are you doing?
Very well, thank you. So $61.5 billion. Is that a lot of money or?
It's a lot of money. I've heard a lot of commentators say that it's actually the biggest transit build, certainly in North America and possibly much of the West, so Europe and North America.
And what's it going to go to build?
So there's already some stuff that's in delivery right now, so including the Hazel McCallion LRT in Mississauga, but we also have the Crosstown in Toronto, the GO expansion all across the region, and the quiet line Finch West up in Toronto. No one talks about that, but that's chugging along pretty quickly. It's a very, very big build out, and then on top of that, this government announced four priority transit lines in Toronto a couple of years ago. The Ontario line, which gets a lot of press, an extension of the Yonge line into York Region, the Scarborough subway extension also gets a lot of press, and then an extension of the currently under construction Eglinton Crosstown. So it'll reach hopefully one day into Pearson Airport. And then finally, not to be outdone, an additional priority project was added in Hamilton. So there's a Hamilton LRT project that is also in that category of provincial priority.
It seems like an unbelievable amount of investment. Do you think that the government's going to stick to it and actually spend the money and develop the projects?
I certainly hope so. I think there's some of those projects, as I said, are already in development. So the GO expansion across the region, that will be truly transformative for the region. That'll be all day express service to and from all across the GO lines.
But it seems like we've been talking about all day two-way frequent GO train service for what? 10 years, 15 years?
Probably
like, Metrolinx came out with this places to grow. What was it called? I can't remember. The Big Move. It was like, that was when Dalton McGuinty was premier. That was a while ago, wasn't it?
It was a while ago. And I'm fond of the saying, when is the best time to plant a tree, right? 40 years ago. When's the next best time to plant a tree? Now. And I think that's we're seeing the effect of many, many, many years of political delays. I think that the real trouble started in the 1990s when the original Eglinton subway was under construction and then canceled and filled in. So it made what had been built was made unusable. And we really got stuck at that point. We just weren't building anything. And people like me, I was a teenager at the time, I got really cynical. I figured we'd never build anything ever again. We built the little nicknamed the Stubway up at Shepherd. But yeah, you're right. It really seems like nothing's gone on, but a lot of talk. And the GO all day two-way, it is gradually rolling out. This government, the previous government, have been investing in a lot of upgrades. And I think you're really going to see this take off in the next few years. They recently just announced who will be running it on behalf of the Ontario government. So now we're passing those points of no return, where it becomes more expensive to delay a project than to continue on with it. And there's been a lot of infrastructure built over the last 10 years to get the system ready for the volume of trains that will be crisscrossing the region.
So the radio station that we're on right now is in Peel Region, Saga 960. So the three lines on GO that are of most interest are the Lakeshore West line, the Brampton Georgetown line, and the Milton Mississauga line. Tell us what's happening, do you think, on each one of those lines as far as all-day two-way frequent GO train service is concerned?
So of those three lines that you mentioned, the Milton line is the one that's a special case and not necessarily in a good way. The challenge with the Milton line is that they don't own all the tracks they need to own to have it get that really high frequency express electrification. But the other two lines will be part of the electrification, and you'll see those really fast headways. Maybe waiting 5 or 10 minutes between trains to get to downtown Toronto on those. So you can imagine they're actually going to become nexuses, and because it's going in both directions, I think there's a real opportunity to change the way that we've developed in the region. So it's not this, if you imagine everyone, it's almost like you breathe in and all of the air goes into downtown Toronto in the morning. And then at the end of the day, you breathe out and it all goes back out into places like Peel Region. I think we have a real opportunity now, and I think COVID has been showing us this as well, that people don't necessarily want that lifestyle anymore. So maybe we can see more employment development around places like the GO stations in Peel Region.
I think the statistic I heard is something like 97% of the people that travel on GO go through Union Station.
I've heard that as well. It wouldn't surprise me if that were true, but I've heard that the travel patterns are changing as well, where we're seeing more leisure travelers taking GO. So I know I've done a bit more exploring around the region myself since the more flexible work locations have kicked in, but anecdotally, I've got friends who have been exploring places along the Lakeshore line because you have a lot of the older downtowns along there, so it's a little bit easier to hop off the train station and go boot around. You have that community already existing around the GO station. And I mean, it might be a bit different, but I don't see why we can't start looking to do that at other GO stations. Right now they're surrounded by parking lots. Yeah. Metrolinx is one of North America's largest parking lot owners. I mean, it's
You're
weird.
Kidding. Seriously? Really?
Yeah, it's they own more parking stalls than just about anyone else.
And yet they don't charge for most of those stalls.
It's true. And part of that is their business model right now, but that business model can change. If we can build transit stations to have more people within walking distance of those transit stations, either because they live there or because they work there, then those parking lots, they become less valuable to the operation of the transit. It becomes, if you need to maintain some parking, the land values get to the point where you can actually build structured parking. So instead of having these flat oceans of parking lots, you could have them be built into the basements and ground floors of office buildings, or even creative ways of creating residential buildings with public parking stalls underneath them.
We're chatting tonight with Aidan Grove-White. He is a vice president of Strategy Corp. It's a public affairs consultancy in Toronto about transit and transit-oriented development in the Greater Toronto Area. We're going to take a break for some messages and be back with Aidan in about 2 minutes. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. We're talking about transit and transit-oriented development in the Greater Toronto Area tonight with Aidan Grove-White. He's a vice president at Strategy Corp. He was recently a panelist and a speaker at a Urban Land Institute seminar that was all about transit-oriented development in the Greater Toronto Area. And so I wanted to reach out to him to find out what's going on, because a lot of us, have been frustrated or impatient, I think, in regards to transit development, because we've been talking about this, it seems, for a long time, and we're wondering when it's all going to come. I got to tell you a little bit about Aidan, though, before we get going. This man has an unbelievably interesting resume. He's worked for Strategy Corp for 3 years and 2 months. He started as a manager, then became a director, and is now a vice president. Before that, he was a manager at the Ontario Ministry of Municipal Affairs, and he was involved in the implementation of the Places to Grow initiative. And I'd love to chat with you, Aidan, about that, because that's a really interesting policy initiative as well. And then before that, he was in the Ontario Public Service for 3 years in the Ontario Growth Secretariat. Sounds like an interesting role. And the Ministry of Citizenship and Immigration. Before that, he worked with the Environmental Defense Organization. So you've had some really interesting experiences. You've got a Master of Science in City, Urban, Community, and Regional Planning from the University of Toronto, and a BA in Social Sciences from the University of Victoria. And I guess you grew up on the West Coast, or the Wet Coast, and you've now come to the center of the universe in Toronto. Is that the case?
No, I actually grew up in downtown Toronto, but then I was having a bit too much fun, and I had to move out to British Columbia to get my act together and get my education in gear. But those were definitely formative years. It's a very You're right. It is very wet. It is very beautiful. I miss the weather a lot.
I used to live in Vancouver, and I used to tell people that Vancouver is the most beautiful city in the world when it's sunny.
Yeah, for 2 months a year.
Exactly. So, one of the things that's different about Vancouver, actually, that we talked about it versus Toronto, is elevated sky trains, elevated LRTs, and Vancouver seems to love them, and they work out well. And for some reason, we had this hate relationship with the Scarborough rapid transit. Do you think elevated LRTs actually make sense? Is it something that we should have considered in the Greater Toronto Area?
I do think we should have considered them. I'm a planner, not an engineer. So I can't tell you, like, there's a lot of debate about how well they work in cold weather and how well they work when they're covered in snow. And certainly the way our Scarborough RT fell into a state of disrepair, weather and snow did really become an issue. But you look at other places, and it doesn't have to be. I do think that elevated, part of the Ontario line will be elevated as well, and contentiously. I think that it is something we should take a closer look at. You can build faster. We're not dealing with like Chicago L trains, which screech and are loud and things fly off of them and all that kind of stuff. These are actually modern transit vehicles, can be quite quiet. I personally like the look of it. I mean, obviously maybe I would, but I think that, you go to Vancouver and the SkyTrain is actually as much a part of that city as the CN Tower is to Toronto, or the Marilyn Monroe buildings are to Mississauga. Like, there's something people are proud of that really are part of their identity. And
some people think that people actually enjoy being in vehicles, public transit vehicles that are above ground more than underground, because they actually get to look at the windows and see stuff and see the sun.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly how I feel about it. I mean, when I was a kid riding around the Toronto, the Toronto subway, I used to love the underground parts. But you know what? When you go through, the bridge between Sherbourne and Broadview Station, the Bloor Viaduct, it's amazing. Everybody, if you're sitting on the train, just watch everyone around you as you go through there. And as soon as the light comes in, everyone looks up from whatever they're doing and looks out the window, because you just can't help yourself. It is a beautiful view, but it's also, I think you're right. I think people do like to look out the window. It makes transit a little bit more pleasant. Like, it's, watching concrete whiz by at 50 kilometers an hour, it gets tired. But I love staring. I'll even take a slower streetcar in Toronto because I just like people watching, and you can do it better people watching, looking outside a window rather than staring at someone in a subway who might not like that you're staring at them.
I was on Eglinton last week, and it's still a disaster. When is the Eglinton LRT going to be finished? When are they going to close over those holes and repave the street?
I wish I could tell you with certainty. My understanding is that we're looking at certainly the street looking a lot better later this year, and service. I'd like to say it's imminent. I feel like I really believe them this time. I think it'll be within the next year that we'll all be riding.
So within 2022 or within 2022 and 2023?
I'd say within 2022 and 23. You asked kind of two questions. There's, when's the road going to be clean, and when are we going to be riding? And I'd say that road's going to be clean sooner, and they're not committing to an in-service date yet. I think that's probably wise. But I hear the gossip, and the gossip is we shouldn't be waiting for too long in 2023.
So it seems like the construction has taken a lot longer than planned. Is there a simple reason why?
Well, I mean, there's a reason that, like, there's the actual project reasons. Yes, they've run into things that they weren't anticipating. Yes, that some of those things took longer. COVID, of course, has an impact. But I think that, when you look at other cities around the world, in Toronto, the Greater Toronto Area, we like to compare ourselves to the rest of the world. And so we should. We're a very large city, and we're an important urban region. Other places that are in continuous build cycles with transit and major infrastructure like that are just better at it. They're better at estimating how long it's going to take them to do something, and they're better at actually getting it done and keeping those skills in one spot. Like, to build a subway takes a lot of specialized talent, and if you don't build a subway for 20 years, those people go elsewhere, and then you pay top dollar to bring them back, but then you don't have any of that local knowledge about everything from how much can you trust the utilities maps, and what does the rock do when you drill into it? Like there's all sorts of things that if we were in a continuous build program, we would just get better at it. We would have intergenerational sort of knowledge about how to get this stuff done. And I think we're actually getting to that point now. I'm seeing like there's a lot of talent in places like Metrolinx that are really working out these problems. I think if we keep at roughly this pace that we're going right now of always having something on the books, always having something going out to procurement, always having some shovel in the ground, I think that you'll see we're going to get better at it. We'll deliver it faster and with less mess, hopefully, in the future than we saw in Eglinton.
Now, one of the things that I think has changed in the way that we build and operate is the use of 3P partnerships. Has that been a good idea or a bad idea? Has that sped things up or slowed things down in regards to the building of the Eglinton Crosstown?
I wouldn't want to. I wouldn't want to weigh in too much on the Eglinton Crosstown because I think it's a unique beast. But the way most places in the world build major transit infrastructure now is through models like 3P. And there are pros and cons to it. I know people on the left would rather see it all be done by a government body and it all be done by like the TTC or by Metrolinx or by any like regional transit agency or something like that. And then there are those that I think make unrealistic claims that 3Ps always come in on time and on budget and all that sort of thing. I think that there's a lot of evidence that the 3P model is not the panacea. It is not like the perfect antidote to everything that ails us with public procurement. But I think that there is, in watching how these projects get designed, there is a lot more negotiation that happens up front because they're counterparties. And so you have one side pushing on the other, which refines the project better, which kind of makes it so that you're less likely to have uncontrolled project creep, for example, where all of a sudden there's new things getting added into the project. If there are timeline things that don't seem realistic, like politicians like to announce something's going to be done in 2 years. Engineers say, well, it's more like 8 years. And so you have them push on each other where you probably end up a little bit closer to what the engineers tell you is realistic. But I think that's better. So I think that there are a lot of benefits to project design that come out of a 3P model. And then on top of that, like what I was saying a moment ago about those skills, having those skills, like, yes, we want to have those skills in Toronto as much as possible because each urban region is unique and the GTA is unique as well and needs people who know it. But in the absence of that, it's also great to have a consortia that can draw on the expertise of places like Hong Kong or Berlin or where have you, where they do this kind of stuff all the time. And so we actually can benefit and do benefit, I believe, from having that international expertise that we can draw on, even if we don't have it all living here in the GTA.
Let's talk a little bit more about the Eglinton Crosstown and where it's going to go. The NEPTIS Foundation did a report, 6-8 years ago, and said that Toronto was one of the only major cities that had two different major employment nodes that weren't connected by transit. The Airport Corporate Center, which is, they described, I was surprised by it, is the second largest employment zone in all of Canada, bigger than downtown Montreal or bigger than downtown Vancouver. And obviously it was not connected by any kind of transit to downtown Toronto. And I've myself tried to do that drive. It can be 45 minutes or an hour. And so if you want to drop everything and come visit you in your office in downtown Toronto, it's going to be a little bit of a challenge. So why doesn't the Eglinton Crosstown go all the way to the Airport Corporate Zone?
That's a really good question. I think if not specifically the Eglinton Crosstown, I think we should see some higher order transit working its way through there. Part of the challenge as well with the corporate zone is that from what I understand is that the jobs are not all like clustered together in sort of neat and tidy hubs where you can justify having something like a streetcar go through. So if you, or a LRT go through. So if you have to get off a stop and walk like a kilometer from an LRT stop to your office, you might not do that. Like that might even, and that's a challenge with when you have these very spread out low density, and it's the same is true for housing. If you have these very spread out low density areas, like if you think about like the size of downtown Toronto, the #1 employment zone, is quite small. Like it's geographically, it is even a small part of the city of Toronto. It's not even the size of the old city of Toronto. It's quite small. And then the airport corporate zone is quite large. And so those jobs are really spread out compared to, say, somewhere like a downtown core of a city, Montreal or Toronto or Vancouver. And the more spread out you are, the harder it is to deliver efficiently those transit services. That doesn't mean we shouldn't try. And it doesn't mean that I would let the Eglinton Crosstown off the hook for not going into the corporate center. I think we could have done a better job of different ways of connecting. But I would agree. I think the leaving such a transit desert in the corporate center like that is a mistake, and I think we're going to have to fix that pretty quick.
The comparables that they used in that Neptus report was downtown Paris, the Champs-Élysées, and La Défense, which are connected by Metro and RER. They talked about London and Canary Wharf, which are connected by trains and subway stops. They talked about New York being connected to Brooklyn and to New Jersey with trains and subways. Do you think it's important? Do you think that kind of connection really would help the growth of Toronto and the economic viability of both the airport corporate zone and downtown?
I think without a question. Transit, it just, I like driving. Lots of people like driving, but if you have to drive, if you have to drive with hundreds of thousands of other people into an increasingly small space on the roads, that's not the kind of driving I like. That's not the kind of driving most people like. And for me, that's wasted time. So if I'm going to go work somewhere every day, I would rather be able to sit down or at least stand with some comfort and read, maybe do some of that work in advance of arriving. Maybe I'm reading a briefing note, or maybe I'm reading a report or something like that on my way in. That becomes useful time, and you can only do that with transit. I also think it's important to make sure that a lot of the jobs that are in places like office districts and are in employment zones, those are jobs that don't necessarily pay the greatest. Forcing someone to have a car in order to reach those jobs in a reasonable amount of time is also unfair. I've just got a quick story about that. A friend of ours, new to Canada, moved to Hamilton because he's an engineer, and he was having a bit of trouble at the beginning of COVID finding a job in his profession, but sure enough, a great company in Hamilton snapped him up, and he moved out there. And he could not get from his home near the GO station that he lived in to where the factory was. There was no transit at all. So he actually had to pay Uber every single day until he made friends and could join a carpool where he pays still pretty expensive, the carpooling that he's paying for. But that's a substantial amount of an entry-level wage that's spent on transportation. And I think if he had lived here longer before that job, and if he had more options available, he might have second guessed that. And he's a solid worker. He gets great reviews. So think about the employer. So the employer now is losing out. If we don't have good transit delivering people efficiently to their offices, to their places of work, then those employers are missing out on that talent as well. So transit is necessary to keep talent moving around and going to where it makes the most sense, and not having it such that, I think to myself, I'm only going to work in this neighborhood because I'm only willing to spend half an hour on transit, even though there might be a better fit, a better job for me. That just takes an hour and a half to drive because there's no transit to get me there.
We talked a couple minutes ago about the big move, Metrolinx's plan and the provincial government's plan that was developed over the course of numerous years. It seems that there were different public consultations and engineering studies and all that kind of stuff. And then out of the blue comes the Ontario line that no one had ever thought about and talked about before. Does it make sense, do you think? And where did it come from?
I think the big move evolved many times since it came out. So that was about 16 years ago, I want to say. I think it was 2006, something like that, or maybe 2008. So 14 years ago, the big move came out. And it was a big move, and it was a very expensive move that was not funded. And so over the years, that move has changed a lot. Even the McGuinty government changed it, and then the Wynne government changed it. They all gave it new names, Regional Transportation Plan. It just gets more and more sort of boring sounding as you go. And then this government has also changed it up, and they are largely, like, you see most of the lines staying the same roughly. And I would say the same is true of the Ontario line. It was an innovation. It was an innovation for sure from what had originally been planned. There was an elbow-shaped downtown relief line, as it was being called, that would have been a full heavy subway, and it wouldn't have been as long. It wouldn't have gone as far. This government decided that it wanted to rethink that altogether, and open the door up to new technologies, which was, I think, one of the game changers on that, was when you say it doesn't have to be a heavy subway, it can be something else. It means that you have different options. And they also decided that rather than use this elbow shape, that would mean having to dig very, very deep, which would have been incredibly expensive as well. They would make use of the existing rail corridor. So I think in terms of whether or not it is a change that I would have done, having walked in, I don't know. But I think that ultimately it means that it's going to get built. I think that the problem with the old downtown relief line was that it was really, it was becoming increasingly expensive, and didn't really have that much of a reach. It would have just really relieved the Yonge line. And I don't know if it ever would have got funded. It just wasn't attractive enough politically. I mean, that's the other thing, is there's politics involved here. This new one goes twice as far north, maybe more, and then goes all the way out to exhibition grounds. So that's a big difference for the money we're paying for it as a province.
We're chatting tonight with Aidan Grove White. He is a transportation planning expert at Strategy Corp, a public affairs consultancy in Toronto. He was recently as part of a panel at Urban Land Institute panel on transit and transit-oriented development. We've been talking primarily about transit. We're going to take a break for some messages, and when we come back, I'm going to ask him a little bit more about the development that goes along with transit, and is that going to change the face of Toronto, and can it get built with all the NIMBYism that we hear about all the time? And so stay with us. We'll be back with Aidan in just 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. We're chatting tonight with Aidan Grove White. He is the Vice President of Land Development Infrastructure and the Public Affairs Consultancy Strategy Corp in Toronto, where he works on development and transit projects across the greater Golden Horseshoe. Aidan, I wonder if we could turn from transit itself to the development that comes with transit. And you talked a little bit about jobs and employment, but what about residential development? And, you know, I had Jennifer Keesmet, the former chief planner of the city of Toronto, on, and she said we made a big mistake when we built the Bloor line. We didn't increase the density along the Bloor-Danforth line, like I guess it was done on the Yonge line at one point in time, and that we could fix that mistake on the Eglinton LRT and on the Ontario line. Do you think that we are doing the right things to allow increased density along these new lines that we're building?
Well, I think we're taking big steps in the right direction on this, and I agree wholeheartedly with Keesmat in her assessment of the big mistake of line 2, the Bloor-Danforth line, of not building those densities along there. What this government is doing, which is really interesting and innovative by Canadian standards, is they are using the land that's required both for construction. So you know how you have to move big machines around, and you have to do all sorts of staging of materials. So that takes a lot of land, and the land that is actually eventually going to be used for the final station, the infrastructure. And they're making deals with landowners, often the landowner who owned it in the first place, to actually build transit supportive densities. And when we say transit supportive densities, we're talking about having people within walking distance, either their work or their home is within walking distance of that transit station. And this is the no more Danforth, no more Bloor line mistake innovation that they're bringing. what it does is it actually gives developers and landowners some certainty about what they're going to get to build when this thing is done. And what they're going to get to build is bigger than what's allowed to be built there right now. And what it'll do for NIMBYs is the thought of a tall building is often worse than the tall building once it's built. And what this does, I actually think it's going to help people sort of break out of that frame of mind of, oh my God, I can't have a tall building, my neighborhood can't change. I actually live close to the Bloor line, and it is like, I got to tell you, it is very low density along here compared to if you had a piece of infrastructure like this in another city. You would have way more 6-story, 8-story, 20-story buildings along it. But this new innovation that this government has brought in called transit-oriented communities, this is a huge step in the right direction.
Do you think it's going to be built? You know, there's still going to be public communities, residents groups, et cetera, that are objecting to it. And, you know, you make your comment that it's not being built along Bloor. It could have been. Developers could have bought the land up and made a proposal. But local councillors and local residents associations kept on turning it down. And, you know, when I think about that line, you've got a bunch of development taking place at 6 Points in the former Etobicoke. Now you've got some development at Bloor Dundas. But that's about it, isn't it?
We've got these weird, like where we've almost in spite of ourselves, we've got these little nodes along there. But you're right. Yeah, the difference with, so the deals that the province has made on these actual stations, this transit-oriented communities program, is that they use the provincial zoning power. They probably heard of it, Minister Zoning Order, MZO, which is not appealable, which NIMBYs can't stop, which the Minister of Municipal Affairs uses at his discretion, and in this case, by request from another minister. To lock in those planning permissions, so that the developers, when they're ready to start building their building, they don't need to go for new planning approvals. They'll just be able to build based on the agreement that they reached with the province. And through that building, there's some community benefits that they're going to have to deliver. Each project is a little different. But they also, like I said, they will have that guaranteed sort of square foot that they're allowed to build to. I think that this will go some way. There's a couple of other things. So you mentioned the Places to Grow initiative, the growth plan that I used to work on at the Secretariat. There are also rules that have come into place in that plan that make it harder, not impossible, but harder for NIMBY groups to really use the planning system to stop reasonable development around transit station areas. And these are called major transit station areas. And it's a sort of a circle, a fairly big half-kilometer or slightly more circle around all these GO stations and subway stations and LRT stations that says that, you know, cities have to plan to a minimum height, minimum density in these areas. That didn't exist when they built the Bloor-Danforth line. In fact, the pressure was in the opposite. We built the Bloor-Danforth line, and then we kind of froze all the neighborhoods into what people call the yellow belt, into single family housing. So this is the opposite. We have a policy layer in place in the planning system that says we want density near these stations. And then we have a government that said, not only do I want density at these stations, this station itself is going to have density that's appropriate for the amount of money we're investing.
Okay, but if it took ministerial zoning orders that really override the role of the local councillor, the local council, the local planning commissioner, et cetera, isn't that a testament that maybe our whole process doesn't work? If we need to actually to get the kind of development that we think makes sense, particularly around transit nodes, but makes sense, and we realize that the existing system doesn't work, we need to have a ministerial zoning order imposed from above. It's almost a proof positive that the current system just doesn't work.
I have a similar lament. I am disappointed at how hard it is to get appropriate densities built in the GTA. Certainly in my home of Toronto, it is I wouldn't say it's impossible, it is very difficult. Community groups come out very quickly and suggest that you know, any building that you're building is going to ruin the character of the neighborhood. And really what this has done is it's contributed to this inaffordability of the province. Like, we're simply just not building enough, and the people who already have their little piece of paradise, their home, they are very effective when they want to be at stopping a new home get built. And those new home owners, they don't even know that they're the new homeowner, just so they don't show up on the other side.
Yeah.
They don't really exist yet. So it's really like you do have this very unfair advantage where the existing residents, I think, do have, I don't want to say it's an outsized say. I think it could be that it's just that the baseline is wrong. So, there was talk about creating a minimum 4-story, 4-unit in all areas, maybe just those close to transit stations. But I think if we had a sort of a more reasonable base to start from that wasn't single family detached within 200 meters of a subway station, I mean, I think then we could have a reasonable conversation about what's too much after that. But right now we have like a huge swath of the city of Toronto where you're within 150, 200 meters of the front door of a subway station, and you're leaving a single family detached house to go there, and then wondering why the city is too expensive for your kids to move out of the basement and find an apartment.
And I bet those houses that are so close to a subway station have appreciated in value astronomically in the last couple of years.
Yeah, and if you look at proximity, if you look at house value and proximity to higher order transit, it's there. So I mean, like, for me, this is what makes me really disappointed, is that we go and we make these huge investments, multi-billion-dollar investments, and we don't do the next step, which is to shape the growth of the city to match the ambition of those investments. And it might not line up with everything that this government does every day, certainly not. But I think on this one, they've really got the right idea, is that they are really starting to push those forces of growth to match the investments in the infrastructure that we're putting mostly in the ground, but I mean, all across the region through stuff like GO.
So you're saying it happened at stations on the Ontario line. Is it happening around stations on the GO line as well?
Well, it's really, so some of the clients that I work with are very interested in seeing similar sort of partnerships on the GO stations. They either own land adjacent to a GO station or very nearby, and maybe they could replace a GO station, and they would like to get into conversations with the province as well and say, hey, we can build the station and we can build a community around the station, but what we're really having trouble with is convincing the neighborhood that we should be allowed to build anything taller than single family detached and semi-detached houses, or maybe a 4-story walk-up or something like that. Like, that's simply, like, one of the things we have to realize, this is very expensive stuff, and we don't want, like, I'd say, I'd be willing to pay more taxes to get more transit, but I'm in the minority on that. So we need to find creative ways of building transit, of financing the building of transit. And there are a number of developers out there who are willing to get in the game, but almost always the deal for them is, you need to come in and help us so that we're not fighting war after war after war after war with NIMBY groups or some of the officials that might be swayed by them.
I think it's a really important point that you're making, and I think that I'll give you one example where I was involved in a project where 2 years ago the city was requesting a minimum parking requirement, and then more recently in another proposal in the exact same area, the city had changed its whole attitude toward not wanting any parking at all because they wanted to induce transit development. And so, making sure that the city, the municipal governments have the right orientation, are working towards some of the things that you're talking about, are critically important. And too often it seems like there's officials and councillors that just aren't. And whether that's because they're motivated by the electors that are the NIMBYs from the residents groups that you're talking about, or whether it's just that they're scared of change. Joe Barrage, made a presentation at one point in time that said, don't be worried about this. It's going to happen. The densification is going to happen around major transit nodes, but a block away, it's going to be the same. And he gave a picture of Yonge Street and showed, huge densification along Yonge Street, but then half a block away, other than around maybe Yonge and Eglinton, it was still single family homes. And even frankly, on Yonge Street, in between the transit stations, you were down to, whether it was single family homes or at least 1 or 2 story commercial developments. So, this whole panel was on how you can induce this kind of development. You've talked about the ministerial zoning orders as one avenue. Is there another way? What else should be done? Is there a way of changing the attitude in the public and the governance system that we have in the city of Toronto and the suburbs around Toronto to actually orient people to, because housing affordability has probably been, if not the number one issue, one of the major issues, both federally, provincially, and up in the upcoming municipal elections. And we all know it exists, and we need more supply. How are we going to get that supply? Are we just going to have lots of ministerial zoning orders, or is there actually a way that you and smart guys like you can change things?
I think it actually, it's not just me, it's also you. And I think you're playing your part right now. I think we need to have these conversations. I think people need to understand better the trade-offs for having a really, we're a very wealthy region. We're doing very well as a region, and it means lots of people want to move here, and it means lots of people want to stay here, and it does mean we have to grow quickly. And I think we need to have these conversations. I don't think ministers' zoning orders, the minister's hand is going to get tired from signing all of these things that would be required to get the kind of density. I think there's some community groups, More Neighbors Toronto, More Neighbors TO. It's they are going and creating a network of YIMBYs, yes in my backyard people, to show up at public meetings, because it's almost always like, if you kind of support something, you're not going to show up. Like it's like, well, whatever, that doesn't bother me, I'm not going to show up. But the people who are opposed to it, they'll show up in droves, and then that actually does create a real sense of, oh, this building is hated, nobody wants it here, and all that kind of stuff. So you often have a silent or a quieter majority that just stays back and doesn't go to these public meetings where these decisions are getting made. And groups like More Neighbors Toronto are really getting into it and are helping create a constituency, a political constituency for councillors and other city officials to say yes. But I think that we have municipalities have a lot of these tools in place right now. I think some of them may be reticent to use them. In Toronto, there's currently our planning department is looking at how to reform the yellow belt. That's that swath of single family detached homes that is pretty much the entire old city of Toronto. I think that's a start, but I would really like to see, I think that there is still a bit more that the province could do. I would be really excited to see the province eliminate single family detached housing altogether, or at least get rid of it if it's within 500 to 800 meters of a transit station. I don't think we should have single family detached. It's a waste of all of our money. We all paid for that transit. We all want the affordable housing. That is the best place to put lots of new housing. And to have policies and red tape in place that stops it is, it's just so backwards.
So you're not saying get rid of it, but you're saying have what, as it right zoning that people can choose if they want to change it into something more dense?
Exactly. So, I mean, if you were to walk down my street, I live at Ossington and Bloor, you would look and you would see what looks like an old neighborhood, about 100 years old. But if you look closely, you see that a lot of the front doors have 3 or 4 doorbells on them. And it's because all of these, if all of these houses have been converted into 3 and 4 units, it doesn't change the character of the street. The character of the street looks exactly the same. But you know what? There's a lot of young people here, a lot of people retiring in place because they don't have to look after an entire house anymore. They can subdivide it. There's a lot of families. We've got kids all over the street. During the pandemic, there was singing every night. During the pandemic, a group got together every night and sang. And there was at one point, there was a piano out there, a real sense of community. So maybe the character did change, but I think it changed for the better. But what it took, it was a whole bunch of people painstakingly, one at a time, going and applying to divide their house into 4. Maybe get a little bit more space at the back, because when you divide an old house into 4, you've got to put kitchens in everywhere and extra bathrooms in, so you need a bit more space. And each of those is torturous to go through a city process for. Now imagine if you wanted to create a 10-story, a 4-story, 10-unit apartment. Good luck, good luck. But that's the kind of thing that we need. We need the cities to create that base that says, yes, please, we want more housing here, and we want more types of housing, more formats of housing that more different kinds of people can afford. You know, I'm totally a convert. I used to think that we needed to do everything we could to protect like these green leafy neighborhoods in Toronto and some of the other older downtowns. And I think what we need to do is to shape their evolution and not try to freeze them in place, not try to press them under glass and hold them exactly as they were 100 years ago.
So the most important question is, when you go to work, do you drive or do you take transit?
So we have a walking challenge right now. So I've been walking often.
Oh, impressive.
But yeah, it's a 5 kilometer walk. So what I actually do is a lot of the time, because of COVID, I've been using the bike share system in Toronto. I just hop on a bike, and then there's a bike share station about 50 meters from my house and another one across the road from work. But normally I take transit. I love transit. It is so much. It's such a joy when it's not packed and crowded. But if you can go and just sit down and watch people and enjoy not having to pay attention to where you're going on the road, it's wonderful.
We're going to take a final break and come back with some concluding comments with Aidan Grove White in just a minute. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. We've been chatting tonight with Aidan Grove White about transit and transit-oriented development in the Greater Toronto Area. Aidan, about 8 years ago, I was chairman of something called the Mississauga City Summit. And one of the things we were talking about was how to move in the future and how to live in the future. And we talked about a lot of these issues. And I was introduced at the time by John Tory to a gentleman at your firm that I was unbelievably impressed with, John Duffy. And we were talking about smart tracks at the time and how smart tracks and some of the stuff that we were thinking about in Mississauga sort of could match together. He was visionary. He was just a wonderful gentleman. Tell me a little bit about your experience with John Duffy, if you could.
Well, I mean, you really said it. He was visionary. He was a close friend and mentor to me and many others at Strategy Corp. And most days I think about him, and I might even try to have a little conversation with him if I feel like I'm not being ambitious enough in what I want to see this city region looking like. He had such an eye for, not just an eye for talent, but for developing talent in others. And I really benefited tremendously from him. He was very patient with me. He teased me relentlessly on some of my views. I was a little to the left of him. But he always, not just me, but all of the people that I work with at Strategy Corp, he really just brought out the best in us. He really wanted to see us all excel. And he was often like a proud dad. Like he would sort of have us come out in meetings and make sure we were talking, make sure we were being heard and expressing our ideas in meetings, which isn't very common. I miss him tremendously, and I think a lot of us at the firm still do. But we're keeping on. We're keeping his legacy going. He started a lot of amazing projects that we're bringing closer and closer to the finish line, and he's attracted new talent at the firm as well. People like Marnie Dicker are now with us and helping us as well. And so he was a great guy. He was a magnet for talent, and he was also just phenomenal at bringing out the best in his teams. So he's missed terribly.
Thanks for sharing that with us. Aidan, what's your vision for Toronto in, say, 20, 25 years?
That's a really good question. I am excited to see what the city will be in 20 or 25 years. If we continue to have the conversations we're having now, and if we see like there is a consensus building in this city that we need to get a move on. Everyone, we all want to have a higher quality of life, and we are putting those things in place, both between the province and a lot of actors at City Hall. Not just here, but local politicians. We are seeing those pieces get put in place. My vision for what we look like is a lot of people able to live, within walking distance of good transit, able to get to work at a reasonable time. It doesn't take hours to get anywhere. I imagine a place with great public spaces, beautiful public spaces. and just just a high quality of life. I think it's within reach. I think we need to keep making the right decisions. I think we backslide from time to time, but in 25 years, I'm an optimist. I think we'll get there.
Aidan Grove White of Strategy Corp. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. Really appreciate it. That's our show for tonight, everybody. I'm on every Monday through Friday at 6 o'clock on 960 AM. You can stream me online, even from downtown Toronto at Ossington and Bloor at www.saga960am.ca. All my podcasts and videocasts are available on briancrombie.com. The videos are on YouTube and Facebook and LinkedIn and anywhere I can put them. And the podcasts are on everywhere you go for your favorite podcast. Thanks for joining us. Good night, everybody.